Hello, and welcome to the Morrison Scholarships panel Being Heard 2021, a panel discussion about political representation in Newfoundland and Labrador. My name is Benjamin Sparks, and I'm the founder of the Morrison Scholarship. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to be handing things over to Erica Evely, who is the inaugural Morrison Scholar. She's got a great list of questions ready to put to our wonderful panel. And I want to thank all of our panelists ahead of time for being here and for giving so freely of their time. It's been a crazy week in Newfoundland and Labrador politics, and I just want to add the disclaimer that this was filmed on Thursday, February the 11th. Things change very quickly, and the situation is quite fluid, but needless to say, there's never a dull moment in Newfoundland and Labrador politics. A little bit of background about the scholarship. The Morrison Scholarship is named after Catherine Morrison, my mother, who was a lawyer and social justice advocate and a big proponent of young people getting involved in politics, as well as people in general giving back to their community. The scholarship aims to promote political awareness, political education, and civic engagement among young people in Newfoundland and Labrador. The 2021-2022 recruitment cycle will be beginning in the coming weeks. So if you or someone you know is interested in a career or studying politics, please check out our website, morrisonscholarship.ca. We're also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Morrison Scholar. And we'll be posting regular updates as the recruitment cycle commences. So without further ado, I want to turn things over now to our scholar, Erica Evely, who is going to be your moderator for this evening's discussion. Erica.
Thank you, and thanks for those kind remarks. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here tonight. Tonight, joining us, we have Gillian Pearson, Rob Nolan, and Kate Cadigan. Gillian is the co-chair of Equal Voice NL, the founder of Parents for Affordable Childcare, and a member of MUN Gender and Politics Laboratory. Rob Nolan is the co-chair of Citizens Assembly for Stronger Elections NL and past chair of Happy City St. John's. He is also a researcher of the municipal government at MUN. Kate Cadigan is a grade 12 student at Gonzaga High School and is an avid political enthusiast. In the 2021 election, she participated in the hashtag Do It For The Girls campaign. Okay, Gillian, so tonight I'm going to ask you to discuss your experience as a woman running for office and what motivated you and the challenges that you have faced.
Okay, so I've always been politically engaged, politically minded, and extremely keenly interested in the ways that government communicate with different audiences and the ways that decisions were being made. So being involved publicly in politics was something that appealed to me because I've always found it so interesting and the way that it continuously evolves. And obviously there is definitely an absence of women, and particularly young women, and across all levels of political office. So in 2019, I did run in the District of Mount Pearl Southlands in the provincial election. And I went back to work early. I was on maternity leave and I ended up going back on maternity leave so I could run. And a couple of months before I accepted the nomination for the PC party in my district, I actually started an advocacy group called Parents for Affordable Childcare. And that was created with the aims of creating more awareness around the need for quality, affordable childcare in Newfoundland and Labrador. And the opportunity presented itself to run kind of right in the middle of when this advocacy started to get more public coverage. And I thought, well, what a great opportunity to advance this extremely important piece of public policy and potentially have the opportunity to be at the decision-making table to influence government policy. So that was a huge motivator for me. It was the first time that I felt extremely deeply affected by a decision that government could or couldn't make that would really make my family and a lot of other families like me, their life much easier. So that's kind of the series of events, I guess, that kind of encouraged me to take on the nomination. In terms of some of the barriers, I had maybe been out of the, say, political organizing scene for several years. I had a 4-year-old at the time, and I actually had a baby who was 6 months old when I took the nomination. So it's not like I had built this big, strong network of big donors. I had, a small group of family and friends. I was younger. I didn't have that team of, maybe retirees and older seasoned folks around who could commit a lot of volunteer time. So we had to quickly build up a small network of people who we could rotate through, because a lot of us, or a lot of my friends and family, were working. So that's a barrier as a younger person. Most of your volunteer network are probably going to be working full time. A barrier as a young mom was that a lot of the traditional campaigning tactics, I couldn't necessarily take those on as robustly as maybe another candidate. I had a lot of support around me, and I wouldn't have been able to do it if I didn't. But really small things like, well, if you are a candidate in the election, then you have to get up to the local Tim Hortons early in the morning, because that's where all of the people hang out, and they have their political chit chats. And I just couldn't do that. I mean, I had committed so much time to taking on running a higher energy campaign. Um, the early mornings, it was like literally the only time that I had to spend with my kids, and that wasn't something that I could commit to. I had to schedule my friends to volunteer to take care of my baby. My baby was actually too young to go to most daycares, and at the time when you're on maternity leave, it's not really affordable to be putting two kids full time while you're trying to run a campaign. So I had a lot of things to consider that maybe a lot of other candidates didn't. And those very well could have been barriers, because when you have to come up with extra resources or extra volunteers, or maybe there's a few different obstacles, that can definitely be a deterrent for women, especially women who might have primary caregiving responsibilities for children or for elderly people. And it's more likely that women might have to have those types of considerations when they run. So it's an experience that I would never trade for the world. But I never experienced any overtly negative, um, let's say, feedback or anything that would deter me that way. But there were definitely roadblocks along the way that maybe, a young woman with maybe small kids would experience that another candidate wouldn't. So.
Thank you so much, Gillian. Okay, now let's move on to Rob, and he's going to discuss his work with municipal political representation, and to discuss some of the suggestions for structural changes and democratic reform.
Always remember to unmute yourself. Thanks, Erica. Yes, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about volunteering in advocacy and in politics, as well as, like you say, talk about Case NL and the structural issues, challenges, barriers in both municipal politics and a higher level. Specifically around volunteering, I'm very biased, but I think local is the best way to get involved. And Gillian mentioned that she started up a nonprofit, PFAC. Volunteering with local nonprofits, advocacy groups, can be a great way to enter the political sphere. So oftentimes political parties can be intimidating for people who are new to the scene, for younger people, for people who may not see themselves within political parties. And civil society, advocacy groups and nonprofits really offer an opportunity to pick a topic, pick an issue, pick kind of a realm, whether that's local or provincial or federal, and dive in. Like PFAC and Equal Voice in Gillian's case, like Happy City and Food First NL. So I'd always recommend people to think about, if they want to get involved politically, give some thought to what issues you're interested in and have a look to see what groups are active in that area. It's not always necessary to get involved with a political party up front, and that can be a good backdoor in. You can start to build that network, start to meet people who are involved at whatever level. And on that note, we're coming to the end of a provincial election, but the St. John's, well, municipal elections right across the province are happening in this fall. And there's going to be plenty of candidates who are looking for volunteers. And that's a great way to get your foot in the door as well and just get some experience with campaigning. They tend to be small teams with municipal politics, so you can really get involved with the issues perhaps in a more in-depth way than you would at the provincial and the federal level, where there's more infrastructure in many cases. So I would just encourage everyone to keep an eye out to see who's looking for volunteers this fall. To Citizens Assembly for Stronger Elections. So that links well with my experience of volunteering with local elections. There was a group of us coming out of the 2017 municipal elections who got together afterwards. We were volunteers in a variety of ways, campaign managers and volunteers, people who worked with the city or volunteered with the city on the elections, other people who were just interested political watchers. And following the 2017 election, a group of us got together to chat about how things went, what barriers existed, challenges that popped up. And specifically, those were around enfranchisement and diversity of candidates. So we prepared a report with calls to action coming out of that. There was a group of 20 or 30 people who got together, did research, decided on what themes, what calls to actions were most appropriate, and what levels of government those calls would be relevant for. So some would be municipal, some would be provincial. And the two themes that really link to tonight's discussion are access to voting and diversity of candidates. And under access to voting, two main calls to action that we had were enfranchisement of permanent residents and election timing and enfranchisement. And enfranchisement of permanent residents, what we were calling for and what we are calling for is to allow permanent residents to vote in local elections. That's been allowed in certain provinces over time. Right now, there's no province that allows it in Canada, but there are countries such as Ireland, Greece, Iceland, and New Zealand that allow permanent residents to vote in local elections specifically. So we came out in favor of that and called for that. One, because the province has a population growth strategy and we want to engage people as early as possible and get them involved in the political process, get them interested in the political process. Simply that local issues are everyone's issues. Everyone's involved in one way or another in municipal issues. And with election timing and enfranchisement, municipal elections are held at the end of September, and you're required to be in your municipality for 30 days prior to the election day in order to vote. So that disenfranchises many students, university students who only make it to St. John's, for example, or Corner Brook at the beginning of September, and disenfranchises parents as well, because September is such a busy month in terms of both voting as well as thinking about running. It's a hard time for parents to think about running. So those were our calls with access to voting. And we also had calls with diversity of candidates. So this plays nicely into what Jill is talking about. Two of our main calls there were ranked choice voting and in relation to voting method. So ranked choice voting, as most of you would be aware, is you have a list of candidates and you can rank your choices. Ontario allowed pilot projects of this in 2018, I believe it was. London, Ontario, and I believe one or two other municipalities held ranked choice ballot, and it was successful. Arguments in favor of ranked choice voting tend to be it increases the diversity of candidates and diversity of voters. And in that way, it increases engagement in the vote. There's a variety of other benefits with ranked choice voting. One of the main cons that is brought up is confusion around ranked choice voting. which is really not an issue because you can treat a ranked ballot as a normal ballot if you wanted to. But if you want to rank your choices, then you can. Voting method was another one that came up, and this has just been talked about at City Hall in St. John's City Council around mail-in ballot. So there was a series of issues that occurred in the 2017 election. The one that we hear the most about is people receiving multiple mail-in ballots. So there were issues with the integrity of the mail out. Recently, there's been a conversation at City Hall around whether they should require registration among voters. And we weren't calling for that. We're calling for an investigation of what the best method of voting would be, and to tighten the mail-in ballot system. So they use a provincial list. We call for the continuation of that to ensure that as many people are enfranchised as possible. And with that and ranked choice voting, both would be from the provincial level, what they allow municipalities to do. So that just goes, I bring that up because with our advocacy groups, we need to think about what level of government we're advocating to. And that goes back to the discussion again of who do you know, who's in your network, what knowledge base do you have? And it's great to build that up just through volunteering with whatever group interests you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. You covered some really great points on access to voting. As an elections worker myself, I know some of the local problems that people face, and you addressed that very well. Thanks. Now I'm going to speak to Kate Cadigan, a grade 12 student at Gonzaga High. As a politically interested student and your recent experience being paired with the provincial political program, could you speak to us a little bit about this hashtag Do It for Girls and your work with Dr. Bittner?
Yeah, so on January 31st, so a few weeks ago, I got the opportunity to go with 3 female candidates from 3 different parties. So I was paired with Carla Hayward from the Liberal Party, Christina Annis from the PC Party, and Sheila O'Leary from the NDP Party. And I have to say it was a really eye-opening experience for me. Before involving myself with the Do It for the Girls program, I wasn't aware of all the issues that women particularly faced when running in an election. We had some really empowering conversations about their age and their experience and how they felt as though that was questioned more often than men when they were canvassing. And I got the opportunity to actually go out with some of the candidates and see firsthand what it's like to be as a woman in politics. And I have to say it was very, very cool to see that someone like me can make these big changes and stand up for what they believe in. I think that programs and opportunities like Do It for the Girls should be more readily available for youth. I think one way to engage youth in democracy and to prepare them for their time to vote is to have opportunities like this ready for them. I don't necessarily think that it has to only be for girls. I think that part of it is engaging all youth in this and showing them what it means to be a leader in your community. And that doesn't necessarily mean like, I'm not sure if I'm going to be a politician, if that's what I want, but it has shown me how to be a strong leader, whether that's as a politician, an advocate, a community member, or whatever it may be. I think that having opportunities like this sets our whole province up for a better future, because in a few years it will be us who are making the decisions, and without a foundation, it's hard to do that, and it's hard to represent our province well when we haven't had the insight until we're kind of in that position. I think exposing youth to the truth, like the real problems, is going to be part of that change. So I was so excited that Amanda reached out to me. She's a great person. I am good friends with her, and she has created so many opportunities for me. But it was something that I think more people should be involved with.
Thank you so much. I had Amanda as a prof last year. She is really great. Love her. Okay, so now we're going to open it up to a Q&A period, and I'm just going to go back and forth between panelists on some questions that were prepared. So I'm going to start back with Gillian, and ask you what is some advice that you would like to give to women and girls, or just youth in general, that are hopeful about a career in politics?
So I think I'm going to elaborate on some of the points that Rob was making earlier. Sometimes when we say becoming involved in politics, we think immediately about partisan politics, and everything is political. So you can become involved in nonprofits and nonpartisan organizations that have real impacts on political outcomes. And it really is a good way to get your foot in the door and get a sense of the wheels and cogs that exist in terms of how government policy is made and how people in community can influence agendas and different decision making, and what is important to our elected officials. So, I wasn't successful when I ran, but it really did give me a platform because it did give me some exposure, and it allowed the issues that were important to me and important to a lot of other people to come to the forefront. So once I was able to establish kind of a platform and a public persona, I really ran with that and went hard with the Parents for Affordable Childcare, and subsequently, talking and getting more access to people to discuss issues that disproportionately affected women, and more, I was able to establish an even bigger network. I started my master's at MUN. I joined the Gender and Politics Lab and really started adding in, more and more like-minded people to my network. And, eventually, we're a couple of years later, and the current administration did add in $25 a day childcare. Some of the issues that myself and others advocate for are top of mind in terms of intimate partner violence, and women who are not adequately represented on the ballot now with my work with Equal Voice. So you don't have to get involved in partisan politics. It can seem intimidating for some people, especially to approach them right off the gate. But if you look in the ranks, and if you look in the bones of a lot of these political parties, they are full of community-minded advocates who are likely passionate about something, and they have a history and a background, and somewhere along the way they became involved in some political party. So I think, to Rob's point, that's excellent advice for young women. If there's something that interests you, there's probably a group of like-minded people out there who are willing to bring you into the fold. And I can guarantee you that organizations love when new people approach them and want to be involved. So don't be afraid to reach out and become involved. And that can lead you to a partisan path if that's your choosing, but you don't have to be involved with a party necessarily to have a really big impact on your community.
Thank you. That's some great advice. All right, now we're going to move on to a question for Rob. Just this past week, we've seen some real structural barriers to voting and political engagement more broadly. What do you think we can be doing either during elections or on the democratic reform side to improve participation?
It's a big question. I think, and this is something that Jill has spoken about and Equal Voice have spoken about, elections need to be reliable. So we need to know when they're coming, and we need to be prepared for them in terms of both voters and candidates. Ideally, people who are thinking about becoming candidates are able to have the decision-making process that allows them to prepare best to be the candidate and make that decision. And voters need to be prepared for election day so that we have as many people enfranchised and we have as large a voter turnout as possible. This week has shown that hasn't really been the case. This morning on CBC radio, there was a debate around whether 1,500 people would be allowed to vote because they're in self-isolation. And those are real barriers. Those are obvious barriers to voting. And I think the fixed election date is an attempt to do something about it. But as we've seen, that it's not really a fixed election date. At the municipal level, we do have fixed election dates. So everyone knows that every 4 years at the end of September, there's going to be an election, and you can spend 4 years in between elections thinking about whether you're going to run. In our Westminster system, it's not as possible to have a fixed election date, but I do think it needs to be reliable. And the fact that we got to this week and there was a spike in cases that was not unpredictable. And we weren't prepared for that in terms of Elections NL and whoever else had to make the decisions. That was also unacceptable. You know, we need to ensure that there's as much integrity as possible in our elections. And people need to have faith in the decision makers who are making the decisions. And right now, the priority is public health, as it should be. But there was no need, in my opinion, to have as much uncertainty over the last few days that could have very well led to a large group being disenfranchised. Now we have a delay or an extension for those districts that would be affected, which is a good solution to a certain extent. But I think that needs to be first and foremost, that we think about having as many people be enfranchised and have as high voter turnout, as well as allowing as large a group to consider running for election as possible.
Okay, and sorry, I'll get to you in a second, Kate, but just jumping off from that, I have a question that kind of relates as to what are some lessons that you've learned at the municipal level that you may think could be applicable to the province or the country? And are there challenges in terms of scale and vice versa? Thank you.
I think a scale question is really related to how close local politics are to people. So we were able to start an advocacy group. Many of us had worked on campaigns for city councilors, and we were able to almost immediately get meetings with most councilors and the mayor when we put out our report, Case NL. It's not as easy to do that with provincial politicians. It's certainly not as easy to do that with federal politicians. So that's one barrier when you jump from municipal to provincial and federal. It's not impossible to do that advocacy, and you just need to be working with your local politicians. It's your MHAs and your MPs in that case. I think a lesson that we learned going through the process is that advocacy groups really can affect change. So we put out that report in 2018 and we did advocacy, and now they've put through changes for campaign finance reform, which I'm very proud of and our group is very proud of. And that's a real tangible policy change that was advocated for. And as Jill mentioned, PFAC advocating for childcare had real tangible outcomes at the provincial level. And we're seeing that right across Canada, you know. So I think the lesson is that if you have, you know, back to the broken record of if you have an issue that you're interested in, go find a group to work with. You can really affect change through collective action.
Thank you. All right, and just to segue into issues, as a young person yourself, Kate, who's involved and interested in politics, I'm curious as to what you believe are the more important issues facing our political system and what you think could be used as tools to affect the change.
Yeah, as a young person, from what I see, I believe the people of Newfoundland and Labrador have realized the economic situation that we're in, but we have yet to see dramatic change in the way we work. So I think it can be frustrating. I'm hopeful, though, that parties will be brave enough to make courageous changes that our province requires. I think, though, really, there's going to be challenges in all areas. It's rare that a government is perfect, and we're just going to work towards it and try to do our best. But I think there's definitely challenges in healthcare, education, natural resources, immigration, economy, tourism, and all of that. And it's not only because of COVID-19. I believe these problems existed before, but I think the base of solving these problems starts with our economy. I believe democracy and engaging, like civic engagement, is really important in making this problem or these challenges better when considering the future. The system, I believe, will be weak when we don't involve all citizens in decisions. And without the engagement of the people of our province, our leaders can't have a clear picture of what we need. So I think it's really important that we use our voice because we all have them. And if we don't have them, we have people who want to help us. So it's important that we talk to our leaders and communicate with the people who want to help us, because if we don't engage, it's hard to work to something better because they're representing us. So we need to make sure that we are staying involved and staying engaged as much as we can. And again, it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to join a party. You don't have to be partisan. You can do it as a friend, as a family member. Having these conversations, I think, are very valuable because we learn from each other. We learn from conversation. I know personally, I learn best when talking to people, and in conversations like this, I learn the most. So I think that's the most valuable thing to solving these bigger problems, is just having communication between the higher levels and the citizens of Newfoundland and Labrador for finding the solutions to the challenges we are facing today.
Thank you so much. Okay, another question for Gillian. I know you talked a bit about what it was like being a mother as well as your experience when you were running. Could you tell us a bit more about experiences that you had that you felt were disadvantaging as because of your gender? Maybe that extra pressure that men or other people might not feel.
Sure, yeah. So I feel like some of my experiences that were, um, I'm not going to say negative, but maybe a little more concerning to me, definitely involved like an intersection of my identities. So, I was young, I was a woman, and I was a young mother. And I felt like for every person that was, extremely, proud and encouraging that I was all of those things and that I was running, there were still a lot of people who thought that it was kind of, inappropriate. There are a lot of traditional views out there about when young women have the right to run, and if they have additional responsibilities, whether or not they should do that. I actually, I always tell this story at my campaign headquarters. We were getting the cable or not cable, but the telephone lines and the internet installed. And the cable technician was, like an older gentleman. I'm going to say like maybe 50. And he basically pleaded with me. He's like, why are you doing this? Like, your children are young, like, why would you put yourself through this? He essentially said to me, like, your children are going to suffer because of this. Like, this is insane. And I was kind of like, I feel like if I was a 30-odd-year-old guy, and even if I did have children, I feel like his response probably would have been, good for you. We need more young people, which I still did get a lot. But I felt like in that particular moment that I was getting this type of response because I was a young mother. And again, like knocking on doors, I was, 33 at the time, or 32. And, if I had jeans and sneakers on, like I could probably, still pass for, in my 20s. And people were like, like, you look really young. And like, I had to wonder, I'm like, would that response be the same to a young man? I'm not sure. Maybe it would have been. But in my experience, like the way that I experienced it, I felt like because I was a young woman, people were more comfortable saying these things to my face. And it wasn't always, I always say, like, there's intent and then there's impact. A lot of these people, their intentions weren't necessarily malicious and they didn't mean any harm, but they are still harmful because it's still frustrating to be on that end of that type of commentary. And that can, depending on your personality, that can definitely, tar your experience a little bit. It didn't for me personally, I was able to brush it off my shoulder. But for sure, I felt like being a young woman and especially being a young mom, um, I could tell people were kind of like, why is she doing this?
Thank you for speaking about your experience. That's encounters that are far too common. Mhm.
But I think the
Well,
more young people that come forward, the more it'll be normalized. And people,
yeah,
when half of the candidates are young or young women, it's not going to be a big deal, and people aren't going to be raising it as often. And the more that people raise it and say, you know what, even if your intentions are good, maybe keep your comments to yourself, it will hopefully minimize and phase those attitudes out.
yeah, for sure. Okay, Rob, I know you talked a little bit about some reforms already. I was wondering if you could elaborate some more on how to combat the misconceptions of the cons of like ranked choice voting and mail-in versus in-person ballots.
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned, ranked choice in particular would require a change provincially to legislation. And what our call would be for provincial legislation in Newfoundland and Labrador to be changed in a similar way that Ontario's legislation was. So that's not calling on every municipality to use ranked choice ballot. It's allowing municipalities to make the decision whether they will use ranked choice ballot. And in some cases, it makes more sense than others. In larger communities, larger municipalities like Mount Pearl and St. John's, it likely does make sense. And again, one of the main concerns that comes up is confusion. And that was a concern that came up in referendums in BC and Prince Edward Island and other provinces that have had referenda on proportional representation, for example. Any changes to voting tend to have an opposition that says it would be confusing for voters and potentially affect voter turnout. The benefit of ranked choice voting is that anyone who wants to, like I said, can vote the same way that they always would. And the benefit of it far outweighs any negative with that. So the main negative would be confusion. Confusion is not an issue if you can just vote the way that you always have. The main benefits are that it increases diversity of voters and diversity of candidates. It makes it more likely, or it levels the playing field for newcomer candidates who tend to add diversity to the table. And it can reduce vote splitting. It can reduce strategic voting where that happens. And there's a slew of other benefits. And again, all the ask would be changed into legislation to allow municipalities to do it. And with regard to voting method, as I mentioned, there have been issues with the mail-in ballot, and that kind of chips away at the trust in the voting system. People mentioning many cases of multiple ballots going to their mailbox, things like that. That doesn't mean that we need to do away with mail-in ballot and disenfranchise people. It just means that we need to do a better job with the information systems that we have. And we have a provincial voters list that's updated regularly. We have a federal voters list that's updated regularly. So it's important for different levels of elections agencies to be talking to each other and forming best practices. We also called for an investigation or an examination of online voting, and that has pros and cons, and very serious pros and cons. And that was the reason why we called for an examination of online voting. So opponents to online voting decry election security around the fact that you'd be voting in a room potentially with someone looking over your shoulder. That is frequently brought up, as opposed to the importance of a private ballot where you go to the polling station and you vote. Of course, if there's mail-in ballot, you're filling that out at home anyway. And there's some other security issues, but there's also places around the world that are very effectively using electronic voting. And at the local level, again, since we are using mail-in ballot, it's not as much of a jump from mail-in ballot to e-voting as it would be from polling station to e-voting. So that's some of the benefits, and try to deal with some of the opposition.
Thank you. So, Kate, could you tell us, I know you mentioned briefly about some challenges that were surprising when you got into the Do It for the Girls experience with Dr. Bittner. I was wondering if you could elaborate more on the challenges and things that surprised you that were totally unexpected before you went into this experience, and how can we deal with some of those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. Before doing the Do It for the Girls campaign with Dr. Bittner, I think I was aware of the issues that were faced by women when running in politics. I think it's kind of always in the background, like it's being talked about, which is great. But I think seeing these candidates run and going to their headquarters and kind of living a little bit of their day with them, I saw a few of the things that were being talked about, and it really brought to light these issues for me. When a man is running in politics, like Gillian was saying earlier, that it's not more like it's not a negative thing. People aren't, most of the time, people probably aren't saying it to be hurtful or harmful, but I feel like sometimes as a woman, you question, would that be said to a man? And I think a big thing is your experience. I was talking to one of the candidates about it, and she said she had been questioned a lot on her experience and was she ready and could she do it? And I think that, I mean, these people are putting themselves forward. It's a lot of work for them too. I got to see behind the scenes, and it is a lot of work to run a campaign. And I think that's a testimony to the work that they could put in for us as people of the province. Like if we have to be involved, it was like what I was saying earlier, that we need to be involved because these people will put in the work. I think we need to engage in democracy and work for them too. I think the feelings kind of have to be reciprocated. I know not all the time who you vote for is who will be in power, but that you can still go to that person with your problems and stuff and work together to try to find a solution to whatever you might be facing. Yeah, but I was mostly surprised by the amount of work that went into running a successful campaign.
I just wanted to say too, getting more women and diverse candidates involved is very connected to some of the democratic work that organizations like Rob has done. And it raises a lot of conversations about which system impacts, different types of candidates. And, does the perception of fairness maybe deter some candidates? For women, especially, there is a lot of research that shows that the horse race of single member plurality, first past the post, it can be a big deterrent because it's the winner takes all. It's you have to make sure that you are the best one over your opponent, and that's not necessarily really appealing to a lot of women, especially these women who step up. They're change makers. They're deeply involved in their community. They are not involved because they want to win a race. They're involved because they genuinely want to advance a lot of causes that are important to them and are important to people around them. So if we can work on our systems and make more people feel like when they participate or when they put their name forward, that it's fair and they have just as good a shot as anyone else, then you are going to attract more quality, engaged candidates. And when you have more diversity across the board, then you see a lot of these gaps fill in government policy because you have a lot more perspectives at the table. So a lot of these things, and especially what, engaging people at Kate's age, like we can't start engaging people when they're 30. They have to be engaged when they're 13, 14, 15, 16. So they have that interest there. So they can build on that into, their professional networks into their 20s. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, just to add on that, as a young person who's still in high school and completing, like I'm in my last semester now, so I'm getting all my courses done. I feel like if I were to be put out there and vote today, I don't feel prepared. I feel like there are ways that we can better prepare our youth to be ready for that opportunity. It's a big thing to vote for someone. You need to think about it, and you need to put effort in and think about it, because it affects you. But if you don't know how to do it, you're less likely to do it. So I think it's really important, especially through high school, junior high. It's important to teach us, to engage us. And it doesn't have to be some super intense conversation about politics. I think just a basic foundation of how it works and the importance of it will benefit us greatly in the future. I think there are so many perspectives out there that we may not even know, because there's a fear of coming forward, of not knowing how to vote, not knowing how to reach out, not knowing how to make your voice be heard. I think there's a way to change it, and I think it starts within the schools.
Yeah, I'll just add, Kate, I couldn't agree more. And that was certainly one of the main reasons that we set up the scholarship. Our province, and to be honest, provinces across Canada are not good at teaching civic education. We are particularly bad in this province that we don't have a dedicated class or curriculum. I mean, there's some, and it varies per teacher. I mean, there are some wonderful teachers out there who really take that time. But to your point as well, I mean, it doesn't need to be some, here is politics, here is government, although there's a space for that as well. Even just teachers who, before you get into class, talk about what's going on in the world, watching the news, listening to the radio, being informed, reading on social media, but also, I mean, being literate. And I mean that not in a being able to read sense, but in a critical thinking sense of obviously we see that with like fake news and fake information and misinformation that just spreads like wildfire unchecked, because nobody says, hang on a sec, that's not how it works, or wait, now that doesn't make any sense. So fully echo that, and it's wonderful to see folks like yourself and Erica who are interested. I was that nerd as well, in school, who was interested in politics. I did career class, which was like the number, like the closest thing kind of, or social studies, I guess. But I was pretentious enough that I job shadowed Danny Williams for a day. Like that was my job shadowing experience. I have thoughts about that now. I certainly thought that was it was an amazing experience, but anyway, I'll save that for another conversation. But that was me, and so I'm really happy to try and encourage other people who don't get a place to voice that, right? Like we don't talk about it in class. We talk more about sports in school than we do about the world that we live in and how to change things. And the other thing is that people love to complain. We all do it. But nobody wants to do the work to come up with solutions. Too few people want to work on the solutions. So I'm really eager to see that. Oh, well, there you go. I had to get a word in,
If I could just add on that, yeah, it shouldn't be up to a few teachers that decide to take the initiative to go out of their way and bring this into the schools. It should be, especially around like municipal and federal elections. I remember my high school did it because of one amazing teacher who, did PowerPoint presentation on a little bit of the candidates and we actually did a mock vote, and it turned out really well. And I feel like students need that nonpartisan kind of information on government and politics at a young age, rather than just what they hear from social media and their parents at the dinner table,
Yeah, I fully agree with Erica on that. I mean, having a reliable source of nonpartisan information is super duper important. I think that a lot of young people are making their decisions based off of what they've grown up around, which might be what they believe. It might reflect that. But I think that there are some different ideas out there, and we need a reliable source to look and find good information to make an educated vote. I also think in our classrooms, there are great leaders that should be like identified. Like, I'm lucky, I'm super outgoing, I don't have a problem speaking my mind, but there are some really smart, intelligent people who could be change makers in the future. And I think that they're the ones too that need to have this information, because 10, 15 years from now, they'll be up there making these choices with us. So I think that's also super important.
I would just throw in, and Jill touched on this a little bit. We've talked a lot about electoral systems and electoral reform, but we really need to also have democratic reform as a whole, holistic democratic reform. So it's, you know, and Jill has done a great job of talking about this before through Equal Voice. When the House of Assembly is full of conflict, and that's the way that it's shown that legislation gets passed and our politics works, a lot of people will feel marginalized and will feel intimidated from running, especially if you don't see yourself reflected in those chambers. It's that much scarier when it's a conflict-ridden process. So we really need to work on democratic reform and reform of our parliamentary procedures. You know, I think in Newfoundland and Labrador, we're guilty of kind of still having the intensity and the friction that we had in the mid 20th century coming out of Confederation, you know. And if we want to have as diverse a set of voices in those chambers at the municipal level, at the federal level, I think there's a variety of ways to have a greater consensus building and just have a more welcoming place within politics.
All right, well, that pretty much wraps everything up for tonight. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here tonight and taking your time out of your day to talk about these important issues. If you've been interested in the topics that we discussed here tonight, I advise you to check out Morrison Scholar on Instagram and Morrison Scholarship on Facebook for updates on how to apply and when to apply to the Morrison Scholarship. So I'd like to thank you all again tonight for bringing awareness to these issues and promoting the scholarship.